Hello, and welcome to the Gravel Ride podcast, where we go deep on the sport of gravel cycling through in-depth interviews with product designers, event organizers, and athletes who are pioneering the sport. I'm your host, Craig Dalton, a lifelong cyclist who discovered gravel cycling back in 2016 and made all the mistakes you don't need to make. I approach each episode as a beginner to unlock all the knowledge you need to become a great gravel cyclist. This week on the show, we've got Doug Roeder. Doug and I actually know each other, for a couple decades now. We met through mutual friends and recently reconnected over the sport of gravel cycling. A few years back, Doug reached out knowing that I did this podcast and mentioned that he was heading out to Unbound. I knew he was also heading back here in 2022. So I thought it'd be interesting to get him on the podcast and just talk through his journey with Unbound, talk about this year's event, talk about how he's managing to fit it all in as a professional with a family here in the Bay Area. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Before we jump in, I need to thank this week's sponsor, our friend at Athletic Greens. AG1 by Athletic Greens is a product I use literally every day. It's got 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All the things. I think what I've keyed in on Athletic Greens, and remember, I've been a subscriber for many, many years now, predating the podcast. I love that it's an all-in-one supplement. It's quite easy in the morning for me to take a scoop in a cup of water with ice and know that it's got the multivitamins I need. It's lifestyle friendly, so whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, it's all good in AG1. It contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals, artificial anything, while still tasting good. Let's be honest, as gravel cyclists, we often go deep into the pain cave and just need a little bit of extra attention to our nutrition and diet just to make sure we're recovering well. Athletic Greens and AG1 has over 7,000 five-star reviews and is recommended by professional athletes and trusted by leading health experts such as Tim Ferriss and Michael Gervais. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with a convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into the gravel race season. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills or supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/thegravelride. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/thegravelride to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. With that business behind us, let's jump right into my conversation with Doug Roeder. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hey, Craig. Thanks a lot. Great to be here.
I appreciate you taking the time to join me after Unbound 200. I'm glad you got to the finish line. I can't wait to dig into your adventure out there.
An adventure it was. And happy to talk. Great to see you. Great to be with you. Can't wait to get out with you sometime live on a bike. This will have to suffice for now, though.
Indeed. So for the listener, Doug and I met each other, I don't want to date us too much, but it's probably 20, 25 years ago.
Long time ago. Yeah. Team in training up in the city.
Yep. And
I
through
think, and mutual friends.
Yeah, exactly. So to set the stage, Doug, are you or are you not a professional athlete?
No, absolutely not. No, not even
Okay.
anywhere close.
So Doug's an endurance athlete, like most of us, and not an unaccomplished one. You've achieved multiple Ironmans, if I'm remembering correctly, and always been fit.
Yeah. So, I guess right around the time we met, I was very unfit. I had kind of worked 80-hour weeks all through my 20s and finally got to a place in my career in my late 20s where I had a little bit more predictability on my schedule. And so started joining Team in Training and did one and only one Ironman with Team in Training. But in training for that, did a half Ironman and some other events, and really kind of felt like a triathlon was a great way to kind of get out in the Bay Area and try different things. And so I would never say I was a triathlete. I'd do 1 or 2 a year, Wildflower in particular, the long course there. But cycling kind of became part of my life at that point. I met my wife on a blind date bike ride. I started spending time up in Santa Rosa for work every other month. And a gentleman up there took me on a lot of road rides. your Pine Flat, East Side, West Side, Sweetwater Springs. Always told me that if I ever had a chance to ride King Ridge, I should. So when Levi started his ride, I started doing that. And so it's kind of, I'd pick one or two big things a year to do and train for those. And that was kind of my gig.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then at what point along the way did you discover gravel cycling?
So yeah, I kind of just for a decade plus kind of kept doing the same couple of things over and over. Cycling was something I would do with work colleagues. I commuted from the city down to the peninsula once a week, once I had little kids, just to get one long ride in a week. And then it was 2018, I think, was the last year that Wildflower happened, and I was kind of poking around for something new to do. And a buddy on the East Coast who I'd ridden quite a bit with and remembered that I was from Kansas said, "Hey, you want to check out this thing in Kansas? There's this big race, this big bike ride. It's a gravel ride. It's on Dirty Kansas." And I said, "That's Ryan, that's ridiculous. Why would I go to Kansas to ride a bike? Like I go there to go to a Chiefs game or go see family and friends. That's insane. And plus the roads in Kansas, like why would you do that? Why would I ride dirt roads in Kansas?" And just promptly forgot about it, dismissed it outright. No joke, a week later, I'm talking to my father he's retired in central Kansas. He's got 30 cattle. He's kind of a hobby rancher. And he had been staying with a friend at a little town outside of Emporia called Olpe. This was in May. And when he was there, he drove around the Flint Hills. He's telling me how beautiful the Flint Hills were in the spring. The emerald green after the ranchers burn off all the grass, it comes back this beautiful green. And to someone from Kansas, I mean, the Flint Hills, I'm from Western Kansas, Central Kansas, went to high school in Eastern Kansas. So I'm kind of from all over Kansas. The Flint Hills are just something you drive past on your way to somewhere else. There's really no there there. It's too rocky to farm. There's no major population centers. It's pretty. You see it from the highway, but there's really no reason to go there. And so it was my father lived his entire life in Kansas, had never spent any time in the Flint Hills. And so he was there with this old friend, toured around the Flint Hills, and he's telling me about it. And he's like, "Oh, and there's this big bike race. Have you heard of it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, a buddy just told me about it. I can't believe thousands of people travel to Emporia, Kansas," which again, to native Kansas, Emporia's kind of the middle of nowhere. It's like for a bike race. And my father tells me that his friend, they wanted to rent their house out to some racers, but they didn't want to rent to strangers. So he said, if you ever want to come to Kansas and do this bike race, you got a place to stay. You can rent this house just outside of town. So I'm like, yeah, no, that's why I'm not, that's ridiculous. Why would I do that? And then a few weeks later, this was like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? We have a friend staying with us, a friend of my wife's. It's an ER doc in Philly. And he had come out to do Escape from Alcatraz, big multi-sport athlete, a cyclocross racer, and he was staying with us at our house. And my wife and I had signed up to do Escape that year. And we're talking to Dr. Lambert, and he said, "Hey, Doug, you're from Kansas. Have you heard of this big bike race in Kansas? My coach and I really want to do it." And I'm like, "You're the third person who's mentioned this thing to me in the last like 10 days. Now I'm kind of intrigued." And he had a plot to kind of hack the lottery at the
Okay.
time. Yeah, they were promoting, and I'll just keep talking. You cut me off, whatever. But I figure you can edit a lot of this. So his idea was his coach was a woman, and they were trying to get more women to ride the race. Then 200 for 200 was the promotion. 200
Yeah, I
women ride
remember that.
200 miles.
Yeah.
Remember that? And Dr. Lambert's coach Amelia, woman, really wanted to come and do the race as well. And at the time, and I think you still can, you could register as a group. So it was an all or nothing kind of thing where up to four people could register for the lottery together. And he said, "Well, make Amelia our team captain, quote unquote,
Right.
and she'll get in, and the rest of us will draft off of that." And I was like, I have this high school buddy that I've run a couple of ultras with in Kansas. He's just the kind of guy, because they also gave preference to locals. I was like, "We'll sign him up too. I'll give him a call." And so the four of us signed up, and we got in that way on the lottery. And I don't know if our hacks helped or not, but one way, we got in. So now it's January of 2019, and I've been accepted to Unbound. Wildflower had been canceled, so now I've got a new thing to train for, and I had to go get a gravel bike and try and figure out what the heck gravel biking was all about. And I had taken an old road bike and put the fattest tires I could on it, and kind of started exploring some non-paved roads down here, and it seemed like a not insane thing to do. So I went up to my local bike, and they're a specialized dealer. So I ended up with a Diverge and set it up tubeless and started training.
Great. It's amazing. It sounds like you were going to be haunted by Unbound until you did it, with all those
That's kind
people
of
telling you.
It was kind of, yeah, that was, everybody was coming at me about it. And then a great guy wanted to actually traveled in the middle of Kansas. And I think this is a good point to state. It's hard to overstate how preposterous the notion of unbound gravel sounds to like a native Kansan who wasn't a cyclist as a kid, but learned to cycle in the Bay Area. I mean, the notion that thousands of people from all over the country or even all over the world would travel to Emporia, Kansas to ride hundreds of miles of the crappiest roads you can imagine in the middle of tornado season is just, it's ridiculous. But yeah, you're right. I was kind of being haunted by it. And I was at a point where I kind of wanted to try something new. And so I signed up.
And you sign up directly for the 200.
Yeah, and there was some debate around that. My buddy in Kansas who had never, he'd done some riding. I don't think he'd ever ridden a century before. He's like, "You sure we should do the 200? Maybe we should do the 100." And I mentioned that to our friends from Philly. And they're like, "No, if we're gonna travel all the way to Kansas, we're gonna get our money's worth." And I was like, "Yeah, no, it's kind of 200 or nothing, Phil." And I kind of felt the same way actually. So yeah, we went straight for the 200.
Yeah, I feel like back in 2019 and earlier, like the 200, the 100 felt different when you were signing up for it. Not that I've done it, but these days I feel like it's got equal promotion. Certainly the 200 is the
Yeah.
marquee part of the event, but also they realize like 100 is pretty good as well.
Oh, and a lot of fast riders. So yeah, no, it's the 100 has definitely become a thing. And yeah, even the shorter distances are filling up with people now too. So
And so 2019, that was pre-pandemic, right? So the race actually
correct.
went off at that point.
The race went off. It was hot and humid, and it was the North course. It was the first year they had switched back to the North course, which I guess they'd done it a few times. And we had a nice strong south wind out of the gates, so we flew 60 miles with a tailwind, made the turn. And on that North course, most of the climbing is kind of in the middle section. So right around the time of day when it gets hot, you start putting in a lot of kind of steep climbs on rough roads.
Yeah.
And our two cyclocross buddies took off at that point, and I was sticking with my high school buddy. And I think growing up cycling wise here in the Bay Area, climbing comes pretty easy. You can't really ride 10 miles without climbing 1,000 feet around here. So I was having a decent time. The heat's a little tough to deal with, but my friend kind of got pummeled, and we emerged from those hills into the headwind. We got to Council Grove, and he was suffering from heat exhaustion at that point. And so I ended up riding it in myself late in the race, and finished after midnight. And that was that.
Still, to get to the finish line in your first one, I think that's pretty amazing. I know I want to talk about this year's version, but I feel like talking about your first experience is also equally valuable because
Sure.
going in there naive about what you were to experience, how did you prepare for it? Obviously, you'd done Ironman triathlons, you'd done these long distance events that might have taken you north of 10, 12 hours. What was the mindset going into 200 miles? Had you ever ridden that far before?
No, no. I think the longest ride I had done was, what was Levi had his long course, which had a couple of different names, the Panzer or whatever. And so that was kind of 113, 120, I think, with a
Okay.
lot of climbing. And I had done the version where you get off road onto some gravel. So I took my road bike on some gravel roads up in Sonoma County, which was a great way to break a carbon wheel, which I did. But anyway, that's a different story. So the mindset was just to and I'd trained for some long runs as well. So I'd done some 40 and 50-mile runs. And, when I was training for those, you never go out and run 40 or 50 miles, but you stack up big days,
Yeah.
so you go run 21 day and maybe 25 the next. So I took the same kind of approach cycling wise. I would do, you know, kind of do my normal early morning rides with my buddies, and then maybe get out for one 80 or 90 miler, and then try the next day to go then ride 60 or 70 gravel miles over in the East Bay on the east side of the Dumbarton Bridge, where it gets good and windy out there on those salt pond levees. Felt like that was a pretty good Kansas simulator. And so I would try and stack up a couple of big days, and then, every few weeks kind of build back up to that.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
mindset was just survival. We just wanted to finish. We didn't really have a time goal. It was
Yeah.
just get her done. And that's sort of how it went.
That's what I always thought about with training here in the Bay Area because we have so much climbing. I'm
Right.
very, very unlikely to hit that mileage. Like even if it made sense to ride 200 miles, unless I was riding on the road, I'm not going to hit that mileage. But I can certainly do an absolutely punishing day of climbing.
Yeah, no, and that is the challenge because I mean, if you go when I go ride 80 or 90 miles, you're going to climb 8 or 9,000 feet around here. Now you've got the benefit. You can look at some of the Stravas of some of the gals up in your neck of the woods who kind of tend to win that in Unbound and see what kind of stuff they do. They'll go do 140-mile crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, trying to find, in Kansas, the wind is always a factor. Finding a place where you can ride for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 hours where it's a steady effort is kind of hard in the Bay Area. And so I
Yeah.
found this, again, east side of the Dumbarton Bridge, the Coyote Hills Regional Park, there's a nature preserve. So you can kind of get a 30 or 40-mile flat-ish gravel loop in over there. And I'll do a few of those. And like I said, it's generally windy in the afternoon. So that's kind of become, I can't get anyone to do it with me. So I'm listening to your podcasts or music and the earbuds, but so I do a little bit of solo training for it. But yeah, that's kind of a key training tool for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's so often I talk and think about the type of gravel that's underneath our wheels when we go to these different parts of the country, but
Yeah,
climate and wind play equally a big factors, and it feeling hard and different. Like I know when I ride in wind, which I don't tend to ride in a lot of, like that's demoralizing to me. So
it
imagining
is.
like pointing myself a 40-mile headwind section in
Yeah.
Kansas might be a little difficult.
Yeah, but it's great. You can practice it here in the Bay Area. There are places, but yeah, getting it's psychological training for that kind of torture is a big part of it. And the other aspect of getting ready for that first one was just preparing to be able to fix my bike. I've got a great local bike shop here in Menlo Velo. They've taken great care of me over the years, but like, what am I going to do if I flatten my tubeless tire or bust my chain in a water crossing, which I ended up doing. So I had to stop. I had to pop out a link and fix my chain. There's all kinds of stuff you got to do if your goal is to finish. You got to be ready. And fortunately, I've watched a few YouTube videos and had the right tools to take care of that first year. But
Nice.
it was non-trivial getting across the finish line, and especially once my buddy was suffering from heat exhaustion. We were at the last checkpoint minutes before they were going to shut it down, and he packed up his bike and put it in the minivan, and I rode off into the night by myself with lights and just kind of chased fireflies and other racers. And at that point in that race, the sun's going down, it cools off. It actually kind of became my favorite part of that race. It's just a different, trippy thing. On the North Course, you'd end up going across this lake, a whole lake. You ride across a dam, and there's a bunch of people out in boats partying in the dark, and you've got fireflies, and it's just so surreal 70 miles into your day to be in that place that it does kind of, yeah, it's quite an experience for sure.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So of the four of you, it sounds like what, just the three of you finish?
Three finished. Yeah, the two cyclocrossers, I think they finished around 10 p.m. I rolled in after my late start and waiting for my buddy at kind of 1:30 in the morning. But even then, rolling down Commercial Street in Emporia, I had a dozen kids chasing me down the chute on both sides. I mean, it was just a bizarre, trippy thing. And my buddy was at the finish line smiling at that point. He had recovered. So it was a really fun thing to finish and hard thing to do for sure.
Yeah, huge accomplishment. Now, are you one of those people that can finish an event like that and someone puts the sign up form in front of you and you're like, sign me up, I'm going to do it the next year?
Absolutely not. So the Wildflower Lawn Course is a great example. I think I did that thing 16 times, and every time I swore I would never do it again. I was like, this was awful. I feel terrible. I'm not ever going to do this again. But then a week later, you're like, I think I could probably do it a little bit better next time, right?
Yeah.
And there was the fact that my buddy didn't finish, and he had never DNF'd anything in his life. He's actually the one who talked me into doing my first ultra. And so he was furious, absolutely furious that he did not finish that race. And so he's like, no, we're signing up. We're going to go do it. I'm going to finish. And I'm like, okay, I guess. And then the pandemic hits and it got canceled in 2020. But we signed back, and he trained like a maniac all through the pandemic. I ended up spending a bunch of time in Kansas during the pandemic. So he and I would go out for rides in the Flint Hills. I would rent bikes at the Sunflower Bike Shop in Lawrence, Kansas, and just they had their diverges set up with tubes, and I just was blowing the things up right and left. And so decided I bought a Kansas bike, found a Salsa Cutthroat, which is a monster truck of a bike
Yeah.
with 29-inch mountain bike wheels, and got that, put it in my buddy's garage. And so so he used that to train on, used that as sort of, and got himself a better bike as well. But we were kind of committed once, and I think had he finished, we may never have done it again. But the fact that he didn't finish, we kind of signed up to get him over the finish line in 2020 and
Yep.
had 2 years to train for it.
And so were you successful getting them across the finish?
We did. We got it done. Went out at a nice slow pace. We did not have the rest of the crew with us. One of them had a baby there, so it was just the two of us that year. And his 80-year-old dad, who lives in Bakersfield, came to be our support crew. So we had cell phone coverage in the Flint Hills, show him where to go. It was the same north course. We kind of all set up the day before, but we went out again. South wind, hot, humid, just punishing. But we took our time, got the nutrition right. Any of these long events, they're eating competitions as much as anything. But he had had 2 years to train, and we got it done. We finished around 12:30. So again, I guess they called that the breakfast club. So we crossed the finish line together. Just a wonderful day out on the bike, and it was really gratifying to get him over the line. And that was when he told me that we were going for the 1,000-mile chalice.
And what is that?
So if you ride the 200 race 5 times, they give you a chalice, and it's on the in the awards ceremony on Sunday morning. And yeah, it's something. So he and I are never gonna win our age group. That's just not who we are. But we're pretty good at not stopping. So that's the goal now, apparently. And so yeah.
Now
So we came back this year.
You're slightly off sequence with your buddy. You may
Yeah.
get there ahead of him. Are you going to go for 6 if that's the case?
I don't know. We'll see. And crazy things happen. I may be injured. I may not make one. So you just don't know how these things are going to go. But it has become a goal here now in our 50s to try and finish that thing 5 times. And so yeah, we're even more off sync once we get to this year's event. I'll tell you about that. But it's become a thing. I go back there. I see family. It's as complicated as life gets later on with work and kids and everything. To have a day or two a year where all you got to do is one simple thing, and it may be a hard thing, but it's just one. It's I really enjoy it, and to just wake up in the morning with an old friend and try and bang out 200 miles on a bike it's refreshing psychologically, and it kind of helps me focus my training. So yeah, we're going to stick with it until we can't here for the next few years.
I love how this all comes back to your connection to Kansas, and it's got to make it even more special just to be there and be on that journey.
It is, and I mean, on that northern course, there are some of those roads that I swear I hunted pheasants on with my grandfather when I was a kid, and it's just surreal that, again, thousands of cyclists from all over the planet are riding down these roads, getting flats, just dealing with terrible conditions. You might have it's the beauty is stark, and I'm not going to say it's as stunning as the Grand Canyon. It's not, but there is a similar discrepancy between the pictures you see and what you experience there. Just the vastness of it just can't be captured on film. And when you're out there with this huge crowd of people, it's pretty stunning, and it's hard. And yeah, my relatives, my aunts and uncles, I got buzzed by an aunt and her pilot boyfriend in the school bus yellow Piper Cub in 21. So it's kind of become a thing. Everyone looks forward to me coming back and doing it, and it's a lot of fun for that reason. And then it's kind of crazy too. You've got all these great Bay Area athletes who come out there, and Allison Tetrick from Petaluma, she's a household name in Emporia. The winner the first year we did it was Amity Rockwell. It just was amazing to me, the Bay Area cyclists who've made their names in Nowheresville, Kansas. It just kind of cracks me up. So
it really is. You were talking about pacing in your 2021 effort. Do you find it hard not to get sort of wrapped up in the pace of everybody else? Were you and your buddy sort of just specifically disciplined and chastising each other? Don't chase that wheel. We got to go slower.
That's, even though our focus, especially after having the one DNF in 19, was to maintain a steady pace, not go out too fast. You get that tailwind, you get in a group, drafting is wonderful, but then you get to that first rough road. And at that point, we saw Quinn Simmons running along the side of the road. Pros have blown up. You hit the rough, flinty gravel at speed and bad things start happening. But it's also great to be in a pack. We met 2 high school buddies who were half our age from Wisconsin, from some little town. They were doing their first race together, first bike race ever, first bike event. They'd signed up for the 200. So we started riding with them, and we're trading poles. And next thing you know, there's not a cloud in the sky, but you feel a spray on, a moist spray on your back. And I'm like, what's going on back there? Oh man, you got sealant spraying all over the place. It's like pinwheeling out of your wheel. And so, yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the fun, especially early on. And man, we sprayed sealant all over 2 counties, but never went flat. But yeah, then we reeled it in. The hills eventually, or the heat will reel you in at some point, or the headwind, or all 3. But yeah, it's difficult, especially early on when you're riding with a pack.
Yeah, since I haven't been out there myself, I'm finally getting a picture after having spoken to so many people about this event. In particular, my conversation recently with Mark Allen, he was describing, you're following some wheels and you'd see someone get antsy because they wanted to pass someone and they would think, oh, I can just kind of ride over this rocky section really fast. And
Yeah.
sure enough, those flint rocks, it's a recipe for a flat tire right there.
Yeah, it's just right there. And then every water crossing, I mean, this year, every water crossing, there were at least half a dozen people in the next quarter mile fixing flats. And I learned that first year in 2019, I dinged my chain in a water crossing and ended up having to fix it. That you got to be real careful, especially in that murky water. You can't see the bottom. You have no idea how deep it is. It's all kinds of sharks. And yeah, you learn some things.
So what's the technique then? Are you just kind of easing off and not kind of trying to keep full speed through the water sections?
Definitely. Yeah, you got to slow down. Or if you see people, if you see someone hit a line and they emerge safely, you take that line. If you're kind of on your own at that point, depending on where you are in the race. The northern course didn't have that many water crossings. This southern course, especially with all the rain in the weeks leading up to it, a lot of water crossings. And I think a lot of flats came out of those water crossings. So
Yeah.
you just got to be careful, and they can be slick. And there's just a whole wide variety of treachery out there.
And 2022 had a new variety of treachery that the last few years hadn't really been known for, as I understand it.
Indeed, and we were all excited. The southern course, a little bit less vertical, kind of had a reputation for kind of more rolling hills rather than the sharp. I had been in Kansas for 10 days, like leading up to the race, and so knew that it had rained a lot, knew that we were in for some wet conditions, but the temperatures were pretty cool. And in the kind of the day before, it kind of looked like it might not rain at all. But then some storms popped up overnight, and yeah, but the cooler temperatures were just wonderful. I mean, you rolled out in the morning and it was a lot of people were chilly right out of the gate, but yeah, not much wind either. That was kind of a nice thing, and it was just kind of a nice, fun, easy roll. And again, we were trying to get everybody over the line. So we got to the first neutral water stop. We were climbing the hill up to that at around mile 40, and I'm on the left side of a double track behind this woman, and I hear a guy shouting over my shoulder, "On your right, on your left, no, we're coming up the middle." And I look over my shoulder and a dozen dudes just blazing up this hill right down the grass between the two tracks. And it was the lead group from the 100-mile race. We shared the course with them up to that 40-mile point, and they split off and we kept going south. But as they blasted by, the guy across from me said, "Hey, that was Peter Sagan." And I'm like, what this? A 7-time green jersey winner just blew by me in the middle of Kansas. How weird is that? And the day just got more bizarre from that point on.
So let me ask you a question. So that going into this one in 2022, it's your third year. What are a couple things you learned in the first two that you took, whether it's changes in your gear, changes in what you had when you were coming to your pit station?
Yeah, lots of real food. Pit stations, be very disciplined about checking the chain, lubing the chain, get more water than you think you need, because 40 miles might go by in a couple hours, or it might go by if you hit a stiff wind and some obstacles or a flat or something, it could take a lot longer. And as chilly as it was early in the day, I mean, the sun did pop out later in the day. They got real hot. So if you kind of planned your hydration based on what you were doing early in the day, that didn't work later in the day. So to always take more hydration than you need, real food versus just, all goose. We'd roll up some sandwiches or whatever, different things. And then we carry a lot of extra, CO2s and a tube and things to fix punctures, which fortunately we didn't have to use this year. But I think just being prepared for everything so that you don't end up in a situation where you have a mechanical that requires you to bail. Because to come all the way there and have to abandon because you didn't have the right tool or ran out of whatever, it would be very
Yeah,
frustrating. And so
it'd be a shame,
those are the key
particularly
learnings.
trying to train up to 200 miles. You put in so much time, and then to go do that and have something that you could have solved
Yeah,
thwart you would be terrible. So were
exactly.
you wearing a hydration pack?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I take a 2.5 liter hydration pack and then 2 bottles. The other big learning is you got to keep the bottles covered or have them someplace safe because the water, it's all cattle ranch land, and especially when you're spraying a lot of water everywhere, once they get muddy, you don't really want to drink out of them. So people rubber put baggies over them,
Yeah.
things like that, or some of them now have caps on them. So yeah, you learn a few things like that.
Yeah, so interesting. Okay, so interestingly, when I've been hearing accounts of the 2022 event, depending on your pace, people seem to have had very different experiences.
Yeah.
So when you listen to the pros, they seem to have gotten through some of these hugely muddy sections either got through it before it rained, so they just rode the road when you guys might have been hiking it or at least slopping through mud,
Yeah.
or they had, it just hit them at a different point in the race. When were you encountering mud and what was it like?
Yeah, mile 125. We rolled into that, and I was on, the Salsa Cutthroat with the 29-inch wheels and 2.2-inch tires, and I'm like, this thing's a mountain bike. I can ride through this no problem. And I made it, I don't know, maybe 50 yards, and just was slipping and sliding. And then it was time to hike, and the smart folks, maybe some of the folks with cyclocross backgrounds, picked up their bikes so they didn't keep accumulating mud. Fools like me pushed it along until the mud kind of clogged my wheel, and then I was stuck. Fortunately, I had noticed in the shops in Emporia the previous day, everybody was handing out those paint sticks, the paint stirring sticks. I was like,
Yeah.
maybe they know something that I should know. And so I grabbed a couple of those, and they were incredibly useful for cleaning the mud off. And that's, I kind of tried a couple different tactics, but pushed through it as fast as I could and got to the end. And there was this kind of a stream where you could rinse your bike off. I hit it faster than my buddy did. And when he hit it a little after I did, and it slowed him down a lot more. So I ended up waiting probably 20 minutes for him to get through it. And it kind of crushed him carrying his bike through that. He came out the other side and was just an absolute wreck. And at that point, the sun came out. So we had just I'd had a nice break. He had suffered through carrying his bike through this stuff.
Yeah. If you think
Um,
about it, he's got call it a 20-pound bike. He probably had 10 pounds of mud on it and
Easily.
gear. It's just backbreaking work pushing a bike. They just weren't designed to be pushed.
Push or trying to carry it with a
Yeah.
bag strapped underneath it and a bunch of gear inside it. I mean, it was just a freaking mess. And yeah, everybody was in that stream washing their bikes off. It was a pretty miserable scene. And there were these two little kids they were promising everybody that was the last mud, which it ended up not being. And I'm
Oh,
still
no.
those. I'm gonna go find those two little kids. But I a lot of sour folks, and these kids were trying. But yeah, it was pretty brutal. It was a good kind of to get
Yeah.
us both through that.
And I just think about that at mile 125, having to kind of reset and just having gone through that moment and say, we've got 75 friggin' more miles of gravel to go.
Yep.
Not even thinking about there being mud because of the lying kids. You thought you were
Yep.
going to be cruising back into Emporia. So
Yep.
you guys get back on your bike, you start hitting it. Is your buddy starting to recover a little bit?
No, because there was some decent climbing right after that, and around mile
Okay.
130, there was kind of a long climb. Like I said, the sun was back out at the time we were doing it, and his stomach just failed him at that point. He got sick on the
Yeah.
side of the road, tried to remount, tried to keep going, and couldn't do it. He was done.
Yeah.
So he was upset. I was upset, sad for him, really sad for him. At that point, I kind of looked at my watch. I was like, huh. If I take off now, I know I'd kind of been resting a little bit, waiting for him. I was like, I could get in before midnight. I could, and the party closes
Yeah.
down in Emporia at midnight. So I'd never experienced the post race party. So I was all motivated to make some lemonade out of the lemons, and took off at that point. Yeah,
What a tough moment for you. Just, I mean, to know that he had that issue a couple years back and to go on and go forward when he's sitting there on the side of the road, which obviously I'm sure any friend would want you to continue, but I'm
yeah.
sure you rolled out with a little bit of a heavy heart.
Well, I just knew that I'd have to come back one more time. So yeah, these things happen, and he was upset. I was upset. I felt a little bit of a heavy heart, but mostly like, okay, this is just things happen out here. And he
Yeah.
called the Jeep, and they came to get him. I failed to mention, his dad, who's 81 or 82 and had been our support crew the previous year. He had so much fun being our support crew that he had signed up for the 25-mile race and had bought a bike,
Excellent.
and so he was looking forward to just getting back and seeing how his dad, when he'd received some texts from his dad, a picture of him in the pouring rain and saying how much fun he had had. And so he was excited to get back and see his dad and meet me at the finish line. So we were actually in pretty good spirits, surprisingly. It's just, again, it's one of those things that happens. And if you can't eat and your stomach's failing you, you can't go on. So he's a pretty upbeat dude. And so I took off at that point and rode hard for 70 miles. I finished around 11:15 in the dark, and party was still going on. So I got a couple free beers and some tacos, and it was really fun. And we had, I didn't mention this, we had given a few folks rides from Kansas City down to Emporia, and that was kind of a crazy experience too. Two cyclists from New York. Apparently, there's a New York City gravel scene, and one of the racers was a 25-year-old with a bike packing background, and she was coming to do the 200. The other racer was a 37-year-old father with a road racing background. He was there to do the 100. Neither of them had been to Kansas before. Their flight had been delayed and they got in at like 4 in the morning. And so their friends had gone down to Emporia. They needed a ride. They got on the Facebook page and my friend had noticed them and we had room in the car. So just riding down to Emporia again with these two folks who had never been to Kansas before. They're New York City gravel riders, and they're coming here to challenge themselves. It was pretty shocking for two like high school buddies from Kansas to see that. And so
Yeah.
one of them came across the finish line while we were sitting there around midnight, and it was kind of. But again, it's the range of folks you encounter there. Folks like the last gentleman you had on, Peter Sagan, gravel riders from New York. It's just it's very strange to me and kind of fun.
Have you noticed it blow up even further from the 2019 experience to now in terms
Yeah.
of the scale of everything?
The scale, the range of backgrounds, it really has kept going, and it's again, we have some of the most amazing cycling on the planet here in the Bay Area, but I still get a big hoot out of going and riding crappy roads in Kansas with thousands of people from all over the world. It's a funny, weird thing, but
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the team who started it always just had this idea of what the community experience was going to be like for the event. And always, and this is what I love about every event organizer that I talk to. It's a love letter to your local trails, right? You've
yep,
got the opportunity to put on an event and you're going to just want to showcase everything that your hometown has to offer. And that's when we
yeah.
get the best events, like when they come from the heart.
And it's inspired. I mean, there's a gravel ride in the Kansas or Missouri area like every weekend now. So there's a lot of folks, and then there are people kind of replicating the model in other states. And I mean, the grasshoppers have been going on out here forever, but it's really kind of created a template, I think, for a lot of folks to create races in places where folks hadn't thought to do it before, and a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think and I've talked with a bunch of event organizers about sort of the economic impact of bringing these types of events to rural communities and the dynamics that come into play. You actually get supportive city councils and land
Yes,
managers.
and
Whereas
locals.
I
I
start,
mean, yeah.
yeah, you get the high school kids coming out. Whereas out here in the Bay Area, you get nothing but resistance because no one wants anybody to come ride here.
Yeah, and as big as Levi's ride got at one point, I mean, there were thousands and thousands of people. I think you might meet a few locals who'd be out cheering on their front lawns, but a lot of folks just resented all the cyclists, hogging the
Yeah.
roads that day. And whereas out in the middle of Emporia, I mean, everybody is incredibly happy to see you. It's really kind of fun.
Yeah, I imagine out in the smaller communities or even going by someone's house out on the prairie, like they're out there just enjoying the spectacle that comes by once a year.
I think, in the what's the name of the town where the second checkpoint was? Madison. I think the entire
Madison.
town showed up downtown, and they were just having a big old party. And
Yeah.
so the communities where they have the support stops really show up in force. You got volunteer kids, manning the crew for hire, and it's just there's a lot of enthusiasm for the racers and the race.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, thanks, Doug, for sharing so much about this story. I love that you've been doing this. I love that gravel's kind of reconnected us socially, and
Yes.
we'll definitely get out and do some riding together at some point in the
Yeah.
near future.
Congratulations on the podcast. It was really warmed my heart to find this as I kind of discovered the whole gravel scene. I was oblivious to it, like I said, until a few random people clued me into this race in Kansas, and it's been really fun to reconnect and see what you've done with this podcast. And I hope to get you out to Emporia. We got a bed for you in Opie, Kansas, anytime you're ready to come out.
I love it. The draw continues to get heavier and heavier for me. So I think I'll get out there one of these days.
Sounds good, Craig. I'll be there.
Cheers. Right on. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Gravel Ride Podcast. Huge thanks to my friend Doug for joining us, and huge kudos to Doug for getting across that finish line, which sounded like a tough deal this year. If you're interested in connecting with me, I encourage you to join the Ridership. Simply visit www.theridership.com. That's a free global cycling community. Lots of smart and passionate athletes in there to connect with from all over the world. If you're able to support the show, please visit buymeacoffee.com/thegravelride. Or if you have a moment, ratings and reviews are hugely appreciated. Another thank you to our sponsor, Athletic Greens. They've been a longtime sponsor of the show and a product that I really enjoy and use every day. So be sure to check it out at athleticgreens.com/thegravelride. That's going to do it. Until next time, here's to finding some dirt under your wheels.